When I was around 10 or 11 years old, my mother, grandmother and I travelled by train to a cute small town in Canada for a week at a spa. Now my memory is spotty at the best throughout my entire life, but I will never forget the terror I felt for so many years after this incident. Our story begins, however, on the last stretch of our train ride. It was late, and all of us were having a hard time sleeping because there was a baby crying not too far away from us. I decided to move myself to the secluded upstairs section where I could get some rest. There were 2 levels, one smaller one with a few seats that lined the walls of the room, and then upstairs with 2 rows of seats and a glass-domed roof for sightseeing. I made myself comfortable on the upstairs level in one of the seats and didn't notice the man until I was comfortably wrapped in my blankets. He was sitting in the downstairs beside the door that led to the other cars. He was older, with white wispy hair, a red plaid shirt jacket, a bucket hat, and a creepy look on his face. I was so tired though, and also so young and naive. I tried to give people the benefit of the doubt, but it didn't really occur to me that he truly was creepy. He moved over to a closer seat, but diagonally from me, and just as I drifted off to sleep, I saw him put his hand on his crotch and start rubbing. Thankfully, my dumb ass woke up beside my mother and grandmother. They had come to sleep with me not long after I'd closed my eyes, apparently. I didn't initially remember the creepy guy probably jerking off to my sleeping child body, but I immediately remembered when we were seated to breakfast in the dining car and he walked in. There were only a few seats left open, so he asked to sit with us. My mum's a generally nice woman, so she accepted and he sat down across from us. At this point I began to get really nervous about this guy, and to my horror my mum was opening up about us, where we were from and where we were going. I was terrified and livid. After we finished eating, my mum and I went to find my grandmother and told them both about this guy's odd behaviour from the night before and how my mum shouldn't have said anything to him. They both thought it was weird and creepy, but they waved it away and assured me that we'd be safe. We get to the hotel, and I had all but forgotten about this man. The whole week was really nice and peaceful, and I gorged myself on so much bread. On our second to last day there, I was sitting in the dining hall, helping myself to a basket of bread and a nice piece of chocolate cake. I picked up my fork and prepared to start digging in, when I saw a flash of red and black plaid at the reception desk not too far away. Instantly my heart dropped and I couldn't move. It was him. I wanted nothing more than to get out of there, and when the waitress came up to check on me, I told her about this guy and what he'd done. When I looked back at him, he was looking right at me and smiling this creepy smile. This guy was so out of place in this hotel, and it turns out he was there for a hockey game in town. Apparently there was a hockey game going on, but the hotel owner also agreed that he was sketchy, and we planned to check out that night. I never packed so quickly in my life, though I ended up forgetting my favourite stuffed animal, and we rushed to the train station. I was so happy once we finally got on the train, but as we pulled away from the station, I saw a car pull up at the parking lot, and out stepped the guy looking very angry that he'd missed his train. Once we'd arrived back in Montreal from the far north, we received a call from the hotel manager where we'd been in New Carlisle. She was so thrilled that we'd made it safely home because she had done some research on the guy, and it turns out that he had been arrested in the past for being a sex offender, especially with children. For the next few years I felt sheer terror any time I saw red and black plaid and white wispy hair. Just goes to show you, you should never tell anybody where you're going or where you're from. I was young when I first got into social media. I was very naive about using this kind of wide platform, so needless to say, I would accept any and all requests. This opened my page to many people, especially strangers. I didn't see the harm in it, considering I was behind a computer, but I was so very wrong. I started messaging this guy, we'll call him John. We messaged day and night. Admittedly, he was from Indonesia and was 8 years older than me at the time, but we still continued contact despite this. He would always ask very odd questions, like what the time was where I was. I always gave him an hour ahead of the true time, but he would ask me repeatedly if I was sure that was the correct time. I assured him that it was, even though it wasn't, and he asked questions about the geography of my area as well. Some time passed, and he asked if I could video chat with him. I got so nervous. I was nervous that he wouldn't like me, or if maybe I looked different from my pictures, but I agreed anyway. When I answered, he was exactly the way I imagined him. He was so handsome and had a great smile. We talked for hours. We compared religions, foods, and customs. It was a great conversation and so effortless. The next day, however, I went to message him and couldn't find him online. It's like his profile was deleted completely. I went to the video app and once more he was non-existent. It was so odd. I eventually came to the conclusion that maybe he didn't like me the way I liked him, which sucked, but it happens. Fast forward a few months. I am at a large chain store with 4 out of 8 brothers of mine. We were shopping to throw my parents a surprise anniversary party. I could feel someone staring at me, so I looked over and I see this all too familiar guy looking at me. I was in complete shock. This guy looked exactly like John. I mean, he could be his twin. I literally couldn't look away. Then I noticed his body language. He was turned towards the aisle, holding a cereal box upside down with his hand, with his head facing me completely. I turned and walked away, following my brothers. I thought I was crazy. We walked down a few aisles and there he was again, awkwardly holding that random cereal box, head turned towards me. He did this down every single aisle. When finally we go to check out, I could feel the presence of someone standing behind me. I turned and it was him again. He was standing what seemed like an inch away. I reacted with a gasp and my brother heard and saw this guy way too close to me. He and my other brothers asked this guy what his problem was, and he said nothing, in the most familiar voice. Then he placed his cereal box on the ledge of a counter and walked away. I didn't see him then for the duration of the store run. That night I got a friend request from John. I deleted my account. Whether that was him or not, it was really scary. I am a 26-year-old woman who has lived in Alaska my whole life. This will become important later when you see just how far this person would go to try to be with me. This all happened a few years back when I was in college. Like any woman at that age, I made a grave mistake of attempting online dating to disastrous consequences. I was using OkCupid to try and find a potential partner, but I also had it listed in my bio that I was looking for friends. One day this girl, we'll call her Jen, messaged me. She seemed nice and we got talking and really hit it off. But I made it clear that at the time I wasn't looking for a relationship due to being preoccupied with work and school. I should preface the rest of this story by saying that I like to help people, and it's really hard for me not to. Honestly, it's been the biggest flaw I've had over the years and was a contributing factor in multiple abusive relationships that I've been in before and since this incident. Anyway, the result of this has been that I tend to drain myself to try and help others and it attracts unsavory and unstable people. We started going into conversations about our various interests, and eventually we stumbled across gaming as one of them. Jen suggested we play this new game, Ark Survival Evolved. It's a cursed ruin of a game that wasn't very well optimized for any system. To be honest, it was an absolute dumpster fire of a game, but at the time I thought it had a lot of potential, so I spent countless hours making various bases and trading dinosaurs and getting into the whole bit of brave explorer of a new world kind of thing. Jen and I spent a lot of time in the multiplayer building things and training dinos and talking. We were having a good time. During the games, she opened up to me about a lot of the abuse that she had suffered from past relationships and from a family that didn't accept her being gay. Having also been through some difficult times, I felt a lot of empathy for her and would try to build her up and talk her out of her self-hating talk when I had the energy to. This is when the trouble started, though. I had noticed that she was being a bit too friendly with me and kept being overtly sexual and flirty for a week or two. It started with in-game RP kind of stuff, where you do the asterisk kisses and hugs thing, and it was all just too much. She was really nice and all, but totally not my type. I had addressed the situation multiple times, saying that it had made me feel very uncomfortable. But every time we had had that conversation, Jen would tell me that she understood and would back off, etc., etc. You know the drill. But it never seemed to get through to her. By this time we had started having communications on a chat app called Telegram. I wasn't always on my computer, so it seemed like a convenient solution. I've started noticing that a lot of the emojis she was using displayed a very similar lack of respect for my boundaries. Just as before, I had mentioned to Jen that it made me uncomfortable. I knew she had a lot going on upstairs, but me being me, I have always been a very gentle soul. It's always been very difficult for me to set firm boundaries and to keep them, especially when somebody is suffering. One weekend I was really busy with homework and a double shift at work, so I ended up getting home very late. I booted up the computer just to check some emails as I ate my dinner of top ramen before zonking out. When Steam loaded, I noticed that I had hundreds of missed messages and comments, all from Jen. I started from the top, and as I read through, things became progressively more and more out of control. By the time I was halfway through, every other message was either calling me names or threatening to kill herself if I didn't reply. I had seen enough, so I just sent a message saying that her behavior was unacceptable and I can't be friends with someone who is going to be abusive like this. I blocked her on Steam and on Telegram. And this is when shit really hit the fan. About 30 minutes later, my phone starts going off. Mind you, this is about 12:30 a.m. Alaska time, so that would make it about 3 a.m. for her. She called my cell number with what she had saved from Telegram. She was absolutely out of control. From the moment I picked up the phone, she was screaming obscenities and slurs at me, interspersed with confessions of love and desperate pleas for me to unblock her so we could just be friends again, and that she would make it up to me and all that crap. I tried to explain to her that what she had done was out of line, and that I just didn't have the emotional capacity to go through another abusive friendship, but she was having absolutely none of it. I did the only thing that I could do. I ended the call and blocked the number. 5 minutes later, I get a call from an unrecognized private number. So I pick up, knowing exactly what I was in for. It was her again, calling from her parents' landline. I immediately hung up, and 15 seconds goes by. My phone rings again. This time I dismissed the call. My phone rang again about 5 minutes later from the same number. This goes on for a solid 15 minutes before I just turned my phone off and went to bed. It was a fairly sleepless night, but thankfully the next day I had class in the evening, so I had the opportunity to sleep in. I woke up from an okay sleep and turned my phone on to find over 100 missed calls and about as many voicemails. I checked my Telegram to talk to a different friend about the chaos that was going on, to find new messages from 6 new accounts. Most of them were just walls of text filled with the same out-of-control ramblings that she had said on the phone. They were the texts of someone who had completely lost it. All over the place in tone and back and forth between "I love you" and mad slurs with little regard for spacing, punctuation, capitalization, or general legibility. I was horrified. I mean, I had seen my fair share of breakdowns, but never ones that impacted me directly. Then I get a phone call. Same unknown private number. Hoping she had calmed down enough to listen to reason, I picked up, and she started by sobbing and screaming unintelligibly at me, starting right back in. Mad as hell, I screamed into the phone for her to shut up, and for the first time in what probably was about 14 hours, she did. Very clearly I told her not to call me again, and that she had gone way over the line, and that I wanted nothing to do with her after this. In a calm monotone that still makes me shudder to this day, she said, "What do I do to prove my love for you? Do you want me to kill myself? How about my dog? I can kill her for you." Honestly, I was so shocked. I just told her no, and that if she loved me, she would move on and get help. This was the worst possible answer. Immediately she started in again, screaming, so I just hung up and turned my phone off. God, I'm still shaking again just remembering all this. She called me back constantly for the rest of the morning until I turned my phone off. The next day I went in and got my number changed, hoping that would be the end of it. A few days passed and I'm at work. My boss comes over telling me I had a phone call from my mum. I thought nothing of it until I picked up the phone and heard Jen's voice on the other end. She started in talking about how she had been cutting herself and how she would keep going until she was dead if I didn't unblock her, so I hung up the phone without a word. I told my boss not to bother me with phone calls unless it was from a known listed number on my emergency contacts file. With my new phone, I set up Telegram again and started going through blocking all of her alt accounts, but that still wasn't the end of it. For about 6 months after this whole thing went down, every few weeks I would get a new Telegram contact on a new number begging me to unblock her so we could be together. I know it's not some big climatic end, but honestly, what could I do? All I knew of her at the time was her first name, screen name, and state. If I had reported it to the police, nothing would have been done anyway. The cops here don't take kindly to queer people like myself, so I just didn't want to risk any BS with them. I have more tales of internet shenanigans, but this by far is one of the most jarring that I encountered. I used to work in a cupcake van in the gardens of a castle in Yorkshire, England, during the summer months. We sold coffee, cakes, and other assorted refreshments, and it was an easy way to make a few extra pounds in the university holidays. So I was on my usual Saturday afternoon shift. The weather hadn't been particularly pleasant that day, so there weren't many customers. As lunchtime came, more people began to queue for coffees, and I was minding my own business serving them, when I could see a figure bobbing in and out of my eye line to the right. Between serving, I looked over, and it was a tall, thin man with large-rimmed glasses and longish brown hair, cut into a bowl-cut style. He was staring at me with his nose scrunched up like he was straining his eyes to look at me so hard. I ignored it best I could as he walked off, and I brushed it off as maybe someone who thought they had recognized me. 10 minutes came and went, and I had served a handful of customers who were now lounging in the fold-away chairs in front of the van. I was turned around cleaning down the milk frother when I heard some rustling behind me. Thinking it was another customer waiting to be served, I turned around to meet the staring eyes of the man. "Oh, hi. Can I get you anything?" I asked my usual question. After all, he could genuinely have been a customer. He stood silently, just staring at me. I tried to keep my best customer service smile, but something about his eyes was so unsettling. An older guy and his son approached from behind the man, queuing to be served, and I motioned for them to step forward. They seemed to notice the guy, motionless, still staring at me, and asked if he was okay. He said nothing to them either, and simply stepped to one side to continue to watch me. I served the two guys their coffees, and they sat down in front of the van, mouthing to me, "Are you okay?" I nodded, but they could clearly see I wasn't, as they whispered to each other, and their eyes never left the man. I sighed in relief as the man seemed to move away out of eyeline, and I turned around to finish my cleaning. The caravan itself was built in the 1970s and was tiny. It had a small window on its door, which was only held with a small chunk of metal, and was the flimsiest mechanism in the world. As I was cleaning, I saw a shadow at the door of the caravan. I knew instantly it was him. He was trying the door to the caravan, which thankfully I always locked when I was alone working. Obviously finding it locked, I could see him through the tiny window, surveying the back of the caravan, looking for a way to get in. At this point I was horrified. My heart was pounding, and I had no idea what to do. Suddenly the man's face was at the window, staring straight at me, before he looked around as much as he could, then disappearing out of view. The two men, thankfully, were still at the table, but unable to see what was happening behind the caravan, and as if by magic, the strange man appeared at my serving hatch again. This time he spoke. "Where do you live?" he asked, his eyes staring. Just the other side of the castle," I lied. "Where exactly do you live?" he asked again, eyes unblinking. I gave the name of a random street I had lived on years previously, which seemed to settle his curiosity, before he asked one final question. "What time do you close?" I never thought I would have been so quick with instinct before, but in that moment I knew the only thing I needed to do was lie as much as possible. So I told him we closed an hour later than we actually did, knowing it would give me enough time to pack up and be gone if he chose to come back. My answer seemed to satisfy him for the time being, and he walked away. A wave of relief spread over me, and I couldn't help but start to cry as the two men rushed over and questioned me about what had happened. The older man stayed with me whilst I called my boss and asked her to come and help, and the younger man ran in the direction the strange man had gone, but came back minutes later saying he had just vanished. The police were called and a new policy was made for people working alone there. We had to have a walkie-talkie which was linked to the security of the castle, and if we pressed one button, they would come running. Every day I'm so thankful for those two men who stayed throughout the whole ordeal, making sure I was okay. This will probably end up longer than I'm expecting, and I'll almost definitely ramble, so apologies for that. I also want to preface this story by telling you I was in a very vulnerable place. My granny, who I was very close with, had recently passed, and my ex had just broken up with me a few weeks previously, and I was not thinking clearly at this time. I, a 19-year-old female, but 18 at the time, was outside a supermarket on Christmas evening, having a smoke as my family went to various shops. It's kind of a tradition that we go into town on Christmas Eve, and I noticed that a guy, hard to put an age on him, anywhere between 30s to mid-40s, who was talking on the phone, but kept looking at me. I politely smiled at him. I'm from Ireland. Everyone here has a certain friendliness towards everyone, especially in small towns. and walked a little bit away to dispose of the butt of my cigarette and call my dad. My dad said that he was in a shop nearby, so I told him I'd meet him there. As I was hanging up, I noticed that the same guy was nearby and looked quite lost. I guess here is where I messed up. Any sane person would have avoided him, but I thought he was lost and decided to see if I could help. Well, as soon as I ended the call with my dad, the guy approached me with a huge smile, and before I could do anything else, he asked, in what I thought was a joking manner, if I was talking to my boyfriend, and I said no, it was my dad. He then laughed and said something along the lines of, "Well, I guess it's too early for me to meet him, isn't it?" He then introduced himself and asked my name. As I mentioned, I come from a small town where everyone knows everyone, so I guessed maybe he was a friend of the family. I'm definitely an overly trusting person, so I told him my first name, and he said I was very pretty, and asked me how school was going. Again, this kind of threw me off. I look quite young, I'm 5 foot, and don't have an overly developed body, and could pass for 14. But I was immediately alerted to the fact that this guy was approaching someone he assumed to be young and calling them pretty. I immediately changed my tone from friendly to slightly cold, telling him that I was in college and that I had to go meet my dad. Before anyone comes at me for being stupid and naive, I am very aware that I was in this situation. He apologized and tried to continue the conversation, telling me that he's seen me around and asked if I worked nearby. I very, very stupidly told him that I did, and he guessed exactly where I worked. During this conversation, we somehow began walking through the car park, and I now realized he was trying to direct me to his car. He then offered, quite insistently, to drive me to the shop where I was to meet my dad, and trying to impress me with his car. I curtly said no and left as fast as I could. I had mentioned this encounter to my parents and co-workers, and we all agreed it was extremely odd. Now fast forward a few weeks, and I had basically forgotten about the whole thing. That is, until I came back from my break at work, and my co-worker told me about a customer that had come in. She said that he seemed to be looking for someone, and was in the shop for about 20 minutes. Now this was unusual, as if I remember rightly, she said he only had 1 or 2 things, and it's a small shop, so there's no reason as to why he should have been there that long. My mind went straight to the odd guy outside the supermarket, and after my co-worker described his appearance, my suspicions were confirmed. Thankfully, as far as I know, he was never in the shop again, and I haven't seen him since. Nothing like this had ever happened to me, and I definitely learned not to be as trusting of people, and to never let my guard down. So a bit about me. I'm a 13-year-old boy, and I go to a sports club where I practice badminton. One day after getting home from school, I got some rest and got ready to go to practice. The route I take is pretty long, compared to the other routes my friends take, but I like cycling, so I always take the long route both on my way there and when I return. Basically on the way there, there's a gas station and a supermarket right beside each other, so while on my way to practice, I thought I could maybe stop and get a drink or something to eat. I parked my bike by the bike stand where there's lots of other bikes parked. I live in Copenhagen, Denmark. Almost everyone has a bike here. And I head into the market. I get my things, and when I came outside, I saw a guy who was pretty tall and wearing all black clothing. He was about 6'5", I guess, and he was standing right beside my bike. He was so close that he had to move before I could even get to my bike. I gently said, "Could you please move?" And he answered me with, "Oh, this is your bike? It's pretty nice." This was all in Danish, of course. "Oh, yeah, thanks. But I'm kind of in a rush, so could you maybe move, please?" I said. The man stared at me for a while, but then moved, and I unlocked my bike lock and got out of there fast, 'cause to be honest, I was kind of creeped out. But I've been given the talk about stranger danger so many times by my parents that it would really creep me out if someone was acting suspicious or something. After I get there, I practice with my friends for about 2.5 hours. Then we showered and got ready to head home. It was about 9:30 p.m. when I got done, and this was in late December, so it got really dark quickly outside. Like about 4 or 5 p.m. the sun would start going down. I went outside to get my bike, and besides the bike stands there was a huge container, which was being used because they were renovating some of their things inside the club. And even though my bike was pretty far away from the container, I could see someone standing and leaning up against the container, staring right at me, whilst I was unlocking my bike. I tried to look harder to see who it was, and when I noticed, I got really creeped out and scared. It was the same dude who I saw at the supermarket. He had followed me to the club and waited for me to come out after finishing. At that point I began panicking, as I felt the guy's intentions were not good. I quickly unlocked my bike and began cycling fast. While cycling, I saw a beat-up old grey car was driving up fast behind me to reach me, and when it did, the windows rolled down, and it was the same creep. He was shouting things like, "Oh, don't be scared, I just want to talk to you," and stuff like that, which I didn't really hear because I was panicking so much. I decided to take a route where only people can walk and cycle through, and rushed home in 5 minutes. As I was entering my driveway, I couldn't see any cars or anything driving past, so I was very relieved and happy that I'd lost the guy, or so I thought. As I was locking my bike in our shed, I saw the same exact grey car driving up to my driveway. I was so scared and paranoid. I ran for the front door, got inside and immediately shut it, and went to our living room window, where I could see who would walk up to the front door of our house. I saw the guy going up the stairs to reach our front door. Seconds went by and he started trying to open the door, but soon he began banging on it instead. I was scared for my life and phoned my mum, since no one was home when I got there. Luckily, my mum picked up on the first ring, and I began stuttering and told her what was happening. She told me to get a knife from the kitchen and hide in my room, and in the meantime she would call the police immediately. I went to the kitchen and got one of the biggest knives there was, but before going into my room, I went to the front door, and there was a window on the left. He wouldn't be able to reach it, or else he would fall off the staircase. I shouted to him that the police were on their way, and that I was armed, even though I was stuttering my words. Minutes that felt like hours went by, and I could see the blue siren from the kitchen window. I dropped the knife and went out through the back door to quickly get to the cops and told them all about what had happened. While talking with them, my mum and dad came home and my mum hugged me tight, and I was crying. The police searched our back garden and all over the house to see if anyone was hiding, but they didn't find the guy. What I think happened was that he got scared when I shouted out the window, then left in a hurry, as there were visible skid marks on our driveway, which were from his car. He'd floored the gas to get the hell out of there. This was the first time that something like this had ever happened to me, and I hope no one should go through what I did. I later on told my friends at school, and they were pretty shocked as well. This happened yesterday after I finished the night shift at around 3 a.m. I work at a store of a big fast food chain to pay for my university fees. Our staff changes frequently because of a lot of students and migrants coming to work there, so you don't get a chance to get to know each other very well. Everybody has their own social life, and it is very, very rare for co-workers to establish friendships outside of working hours. Still, you know the people on your shift, and the night shift is particularly few workers. One of my co-workers, Jazia, started to become interested in me. Not that I noticed. I am young and dumb. I like being friendly, and it's important to note that have a hard time saying no. In December 2019, our store threw a Christmas party at a pub. I went and had a great time, but I also made plans for later that night. Because of that, I wanted to leave early, which made Jazia also want to leave early, despite the fact he neither needed to, nor had planned for it beforehand, which made me feel really uncomfortable. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to get to the train station, and I did, so I couldn't say no. So I just let him tag along. When we arrived at the train station, it came to light that there was no train that he could take to get home. None. He hadn't checked beforehand, and he hadn't asked me, but he now just wanted to tag along with me. Super uncomfortable at this point, instead of taking the train to the main station, he got onto my train and only got out when I insisted he change trains at another main station. In January 2020, Jazia asked me out for coffee, and I politely agreed. I thought he just wanted to be friends, as he doesn't seem to have any and can only rely on his co-workers. If something bad happens, I can just nope out. So feeling bad for him, I went. First it was okay-ish. We mostly talked about work-related stuff, as we didn't share any hobbies. We are not the same age, and we didn't have the same mother tongue. Jazia didn't like talking about work, and nothing more, so he started talking about how different I was from other co-workers, how nice of a person I am, and how good my charisma is. Then he asked if we could get to know each other better. I genuinely didn't want to, and still don't. Jazia is not my type, neither as a person, nor from his looks, especially his looks. Even if I sound superficial, while I am in my early 20s, Jazia is at least in his early 30s, and while I have no problem with age gaps, a story for another subreddit, I am not attracted to men that dress like teenagers. But instead of telling Jazia a straight no, I told him I was not interested in having a boyfriend right now. He didn't take my reply seriously and told me I would change my mind. I told him I wouldn't, but he again was not really on board with that opinion, so I elaborated my opinion 3 times in German and 1 time in English to make it very clear. He always seemed to change to English if he didn't get something or thought he had misunderstood, even if he heard it clearly but just didn't like it. I mean, obviously my opinion is going to change if I explain it in English rather than German. We ended the conversation with him still not convinced, and me being really not interested in a second meeting. He quit soon after, and I foolishly assumed I was free. But whenever he came to my workplace to place an order, he would ask me out to eat. Every time I would make excuses not to go. Finals, travel, anything I could get my mind on as an excuse. Then came COVID-19 that hit Germany in March, and I didn't see him anymore at all. I blocked him on social media in April and hoped that was the end of it. Oh, how I was wrong. Today I finished my shift at 3 a.m. and left with my female and very Asian co-worker Wei to catch the next train home. We take different trains, so we decided to wait in the main lobby until I needed to go to my platform. In that time, Jazia appeared. He'd just finished his shift and was on his way home. Wei asked him which train he needed to get, and he said he was walking home. While the conversation went on, I got closer to Wei to get some space between me and Jazia. Wei didn't grasp how uncomfortable I was in this situation, and she just walked away. So what did Jazia do? He placed himself between me and Wei, right in my vision line. Every fibre in my body felt how he had barged into my personal space. I decided I couldn't take a private conversation with him and said, "Oh, look, I need to get to my platform." in an attempt to get away, but Jazia followed me. Through the main lobby, through the train station, into the elevator and onto the train. I was internally screaming and walked through the train until I saw another passenger. I sat down in the row of seats next to said passenger and Jazia followed. As if every bit of luck had just left me, the other passenger moved seats and went away, so I was back to being alone. Jazia talked and talked, and I showed clear signs of not wanting to continue the conversation. I hoped he would leave before the train departed, but he didn't. Mind you, this train goes in the opposite direction of his house and is 1 hour walking distance to my workplace. There is no way in hell this man could get anything out of taking that train except following me and continuing the conversation. I was freaked out and told him in English he was acting really weird. Maybe I should have used a different word, but English isn't my first language, and at that point I could only think about escaping. I couldn't let him see my station, or he could easily find my home. I don't live rurally, but at 3 a.m. there is nobody on the streets, so him following me home was terrifying. I thought about getting off a station earlier, but then I would need to get a cab, for which I didn't have cash on me for, so I would have needed to walk the rest of the way, and he could still follow me. I decided to get up at the next station, let him get out of the train first, and then just stay inside while the doors closed. It fortunately worked, but only after telling him clearly this was my station. I even held my hand out to stop him from getting back on. He stayed outside after the conductor shouted at us to let the doors close. So let's rewind. He is way older than me, but does not get the concept of me not wanting to be in a relationship with him. Whenever he doesn't like an answer, he switches to English, because it just might be a misunderstanding. He followed me 2 times into my train, and almost home without even thinking about how creepy that was. I was driving on the freeway at 3 a.m, and my exit was coming up. My lane and the antagonist's lane merged into one. I needed to get into his lane to cross over to the exit ramp, and the antagonist needed to get into my lane to join onto the highway. If one of us didn't slow down or change lanes, we would collide. I looked at him, and he looked at me. He wasn't going to yield, so I honked and accelerated to pass him into the merged lane, and then went into the exit lane. The moment I passed him, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. It was sudden and without any context, but my sixth sense had gotten me out of dangerous situations in the past, and I trust it more than anyone or anything in my life. I am so glad I listened to it. I checked my rearview mirror and saw the man in his vehicle whom I had cut off. He was now behind me. This meant he'd ditched his original direction to the left highway and backtracked into his original lane to exit the ramp with me. His blinder lights were on and I couldn't see his face behind me. I didn't know following people in their car was a thing, so I thought I was just being paranoid. I drove into my neighborhood and drove to my apartment, but I had the sense not to stop. So just in case, I took 4 right turns. He was on my tail the whole time. When I sped up, he sped up. When I turned, he turned. I was being followed. I couldn't believe it, so I drove around the block again. I started driving erratically, and he matched my speed. My panicked driving would have indicated to him that I knew he was following me, and I get so angry when I think back to how he must have been laughing to himself while I was crying for my life. I was so stupid as to abide by driving laws and to actually stop at empty intersections, and I even put on my turning signals. I can't believe myself, but I had never been in a situation like this before. Finally, I drove to a nearby police station that was closed, and the guy drove off. I parked in front of my apartment, but stayed in my car for 45 minutes, shaking and checking to see if he'd come back. My phone was dead, so I couldn't call anyone, and the streets were dead with silence. I ran up my stairs an hour later and pushed furniture in front of my door to block intruders. I googled driving stalkers and found countless posts of other women who had been stalked as well. Finally, I cried myself to sleep with all my lights on. If you are ever followed like this, be sure to attract as much attention as possible. Honk your horn, put on your flashers and wipers, make people look at you and your pursuer. Call the police. I couldn't because my phone was dead. And know the locations of various police stations beforehand and drive to them. I luckily knew of one, but it was closed, so it was useless. Thankfully, it was enough for me at the time, though. Try to get the license plate of the pursuer by getting around him. Always trust your gut feelings and never get out of your car. I wish I had knew beforehand how to handle the situation better, but I'm relieved I didn't lead the pursuer to my apartment. I hope I'm never in a situation like this again. I typically don't like attention, yet since freshman year I've got nothing but admirers. It wasn't quite the dream though. I tend to attract guys that I find, for lack of a better word, gross and dumb. They have no idea about boundaries, nor hygiene. People who I did like though never seem to feel the same. This one boy stands out like a sore thumb because I once told this story on a YouTube video. I was, however, urged to delete it because of some of the information I had disclosed, so hopefully this won't follow suit. This started when I was around 14 to early 15 years old. For some quick context, I am autistic and use a classroom called BMC. This classroom was made for kids who needed help with emotional issues such as anger or depression. I only ever went to this classroom when I needed to break away from the kids in the hectic classrooms or when I was agitated. I never really talked to anyone in the classroom other than the staff. There were always at least 2 or 3 teachers in there to make sure none of these kids went too crazy. Some were chill, but a lot of them were really hyper. I, most of the time, listened to music while working, and because of this I was shut off from the craziness and was just in my own world. One day, one of these kids, who we will call Jack, came out to my spot on the bus stop. I ride the special needs bus because regular ones are typically too crazy and or crowded. But the bus I rode parked at the farthest end of the bus loop, so I normally wait by the trees nearby while listening to music and singing. When Jack came up to me, I was kind of surprised. He said that he had a crush on me, despite us never talking prior to this point. That was one warning sign I ignored. The second was that he asked if I wanted to go with him to prom. He was a senior, and what made it even worse was that when my bus finally showed up, I gave him my number and told him bye. What he said back made me want to vomit. He said with no hesitations, "I love you." The literal minute I sit down on the bus, he starts spamming me with texts. At one point I muted his texts and they'd still blow up on my phone. Eventually I told my parents and BMC manager what he was doing. They told me he was 18 and that what he was doing could be considered illegal. I immediately blocked him on every platform I owned. I thought that would be the end of it, but sadly not. He would occasionally try and talk to me again. At first to try to be nice about rejecting him, but by the 3rd or 4th time I grew sick of it. I told him that if he kept it up I would tell my parents and they would call the police. He left me alone for a long time after that, but this whole experience taught me to trust my gut because he was literally trying to date a 14-year-old girl. I hope this tells you all that no matter what, it is okay to listen to your gut. Otherwise, you could end up in a very scary or uncomfortable scenario. Hey fearsome friends, thanks for listening. Please make sure you subscribe and click that notification button so you can be aware of all my videos when they upload. If you have a story that you'd like to hear me record, then please send it to my subreddit rmissfearsome83, or alternatively email me at missfearsome83@hotmail.com. If you'd also like to support me further, please go to my Patreon and join for as little as $1 a month, where you'll get early access to all my recordings, and they will also be available as MP3 downloads. I also have some awesome merch on the Spreadshirt website. All links are in the description below. Stay safe, stay happy, and remember, keep being creepy.